The galaxy was burning. It was not the kind of fire that came from small battles or border conflicts. This was the fire of extinction. Entire worlds had turned to ash. Great cities that had stood for thousands of years were now nothing but ruins. Fleets that once guarded the stars had been broken and scattered. The enemy had come without warning. Nobody knew exactly where they came from. Some said they were an ancient race awakened after millions of years. Others believed they were a swarm from another galaxy, feeding on everything they touched. All that was certain was this: they were unstoppable. The enemy had no mercy. They did not speak, they did not negotiate, and they did not accept surrender. They arrived in silence, and they left behind silence, only the silence of death. For the galaxy's great powers, this war was supposed to be short. The Corran Empire, with its massive fleets, believed their firepower would crush the threat. The Trivax Collective thought their advanced weapons would end it quickly. The Ocean Dominion trusted their numbers and unity. But all of them were wrong. The first battles were brutal. Alien fleets launched thousands of ships against the enemy. They fought with courage and skill, but their weapons barely scratched the enemy's hulls. For every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more appeared. Whole armadas vanished in days. Planets fell one after another. Some worlds resisted for months, their people fighting in the streets, their skies filled with burning ships. But the ending was always the same. Once the enemy landed, no life survived. The galaxy had never seen such hopelessness. Generations of warriors, leaders, and rulers could only watch as their civilizations collapsed. Alliances were made in desperation, but they changed nothing. Old enemies tried to unite, but their combined fleets were torn apart just the same. The war was not only being lost. It was being erased from hope itself. In the council chambers of the galaxy, the mood was grim. Leaders who had once spoken with pride now whispered in fear. The Ocean High Queen said, "We are fighting the tide with our bare hands." The Trivax Prime Counselor admitted, "If this continues, we may not survive the next century." But others knew the truth: they might not survive the next year. The enemy was advancing faster than anyone thought possible. Maps changed daily. Safe systems turned red overnight. Refugees filled every station and port, carrying stories of horror, cities consumed in fire, skies blackened with smoke, entire populations gone in hours. And still, the enemy kept moving forward. Some scientists tried to study them. They captured wreckage from broken enemy ships, but the designs made no sense. The technology was beyond understanding, alien to every known science. Others tried to study their tactics, but there was no pattern. The enemy fought with brutal simplicity: overwhelm, destroy, consume. They never retreated, never hesitated, never spared a life. The galaxy's greatest generals admitted defeat in private. The war could not be won. Not like this. But then, something strange happened. A signal appeared in the chaos. It was faint, hidden among the endless reports of death and destruction. A small message, transmitted across the void. At first, nobody paid attention. It came from a planet on the edge of the galaxy, far from the centers of power. A backwater world, unknown to most star maps. The message was simple. A call for alliance. A promise to fight. It came from a species called humans. The council almost laughed when they saw it. Humans were a young race, barely reaching the stars compared to others. Their fleets were tiny. Their weapons were outdated. Their numbers were small. They had no great empires, no ancient wisdom, no legendary warriors. To the galaxy, humans were nothing special. And yet, the message was clear: we will fight. We will stand with you. Some leaders dismissed it instantly. What can they offer? The Ocean High Queen asked. They cannot save themselves, let alone us. Others were insulted. This is not their war, said the Corran Emperor. They should stay silent. But a few voices disagreed. The Trivax Counselor leaned forward and whispered, perhaps they see something we do not. The debate lasted for hours. In the end, nobody cared about humans. The war was already lost. A small, primitive race could not change the tide of extinction. And yet, in the shadows of despair, the message of humanity spread quietly. Not because of their power, but because of their defiance. The humans spoke with no fear, even though they were weaker than almost every other race. They offered to fight when even the strongest were surrendering. It was madness. It was foolish. But it was also different. The council ignored them. The empires dismissed them. But far away, on the edges of the galaxy, fleets of humans were already moving. Their soldiers were preparing. Their leaders were planning. The galaxy did not notice. The galaxy did not care. But soon, it would. Because when the humans finally entered the battlefield, everything changed. The galaxy did not care about humans. They were too small, too weak, too late. While mighty empires fell, humans were barely stepping into the stars. They had no grand fleets, no massive armies. Their colonies were few, their ships fragile compared to the war machines of older civilizations. So when the message came, the promise that humanity would fight, most leaders laughed. Some ignored it. Others grew angry that such a minor race dared to speak at all. And yet, the message could not be silenced. Soon, human ships appeared. Not mighty dreadnoughts. Not fleets of thousands. No, just a handful of vessels, their metal scarred, their weapons outdated. Against the great powers of the galaxy, these ships looked like toys. The first meeting happened above the ruined world of Korath 7. The planet was already lost, its cities burning, its defenders destroyed. A council fleet had gathered in orbit, Ocean, Trivax, Koran, all waiting for evacuation orders. That was when the humans arrived. At first, the council commanders thought it was a mistake. Small signatures, barely worth noticing. But then, the human fleet broadcast a signal. "We are here. We will fight." The aliens laughed. What could these humans do? The enemy was already approaching, their dark ships filling the void like a storm. Even the strongest empires could not stand against them. And yet, the humans did not retreat. Their fleet broke formation, rushing forward like wolves charging a beast. Their ships were slower, weaker, but they moved with purpose. They did not hide. They did not hesitate. The council commanders watched in shock. The humans attacked head-on. Missiles launched. Railguns fired. Every human ship poured its firepower into the enemy. The galaxy's fleets had always fought carefully, valuing their ships and soldiers. But humans fought as if their lives were already spent. They closed the distance, ramming enemy craft, detonating warheads at point-blank range. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. One alien captain whispered, "They are insane," another muttered, "No, they are desperate." But desperation brought results. The enemy ships slowed. Their advance faltered. Human tactics were brutal and costly, but they worked. Entire swarms were torn apart by explosions. Where other fleets fought to survive, humans fought to kill. Still, the cost was terrible. Human ships burned one after another. Lives were lost with every maneuver. And yet, even as their numbers fell, the humans refused to retreat. The council commanders could not believe it. They had seen great empires crumble, mighty fleets scatter. But these humans, they fought until nothing was left. When the last human ship finally fell, silence filled the comms. The battlefield was littered with debris, enemy wreckage mixed with human steel. And then, slowly, something shocking happened. The enemy retreated. It was only a small withdrawal, just a pause before the storm began again. But in the eyes of the council, it was a miracle. The enemy had never pulled back. Not once in the entire war. Until now. And it had been the humans who forced it. For the first time, hope flickered. The council demanded answers. Who were these humans? How could such a young, weak race fight like that? The survivors of the battle carried their stories across the galaxy. Stories of humans who smiled in the face of death, who sacrificed without hesitation, who fought like no other species. Some called them reckless. Others called them mad. But one word began to spread through the whispers of soldiers and refugees alike. Dangerous. Humans were dangerous. Meetings were held. The council debated again. The Ocean High Queen demanded, "They are suicidal. They throw away lives without care." But the Trivax counselor leaned forward. "No," he said. "They understand war in a way we do not. They have always lived close to extinction. To them, death is normal. Survival is earned." The galaxy listened. More human fleets appeared. Small ones, scattered ones, but always ready to fight. They took missions no other species dared to attempt. Rescue operations in enemy-controlled systems. Hit-and-run attacks on supply lines. Suicide strikes that crippled enemy fortresses. Every time, the enemy bled. And every time, the humans lost ships, soldiers, and entire crews. But they never stopped. They never surrendered. The enemy had faced empires greater than humanity, yet none had forced them to change tactics. Now, for the first time, the enemy adapted. They began targeting human fleets first, as if they feared them. The galaxy noticed. And still, the humans kept coming. The Ocean Dominion sent spies to study them. The Corran Empire dispatched envoys to Earth. The Trivax Collective secretly sent weapons to support them. At first, they had laughed at humans. Now, they began to wonder. Perhaps, this strange, reckless race could do what no other had done. Perhaps they could turn the tide. But with hope came fear. Because if humans could fight like this against the enemy, what would happen if they ever turned against the rest of the galaxy? It was a question nobody dared to speak aloud. For now, there was only one truth. The humans had arrived. And the war would never be the same again. The galaxy had always believed war was simple. The strongest fleet won. The largest army conquered. Numbers and power decided everything. But humans did not fight that way. When the first survivors told their stories, most aliens refused to believe them. They said no species would waste ships the way humans did. No commander would order his fleet to ram enemy cruisers. No soldier would walk into battle knowing he would never return. And yet, it was true. Humans fought differently. They had smaller fleets, weaker ships, fewer resources. But instead of retreating, they adapted. Instead of fearing death, they accepted it. They did not think like the empires of the galaxy. They thought like predators. The first example came at the Battle of Vera's Gate. A council fleet was trapped, surrounded by enemy warships. Their destruction was certain. Then the humans arrived, not in great numbers, only a handful of ships. But they did not charge blindly this time. No. They vanished. Their ships disappeared into asteroid fields, hiding in shadows. They used broken moons as cover, drifting silently until the enemy passed. Then they struck, swift and brutal. Mines detonated. Ambushes shredded the enemy's flanks. Enemy commanders searched desperately for human signatures, but by the time they found them, the humans were gone, already striking from another angle. The trapped council fleet escaped. The humans lost ships, yes, but they saved thousands of lives. Aliens were stunned. To fight like this was dishonorable, even unthinkable, to many species. The Corran Empire believed in strength and open combat. The oceans valued unity, not reckless independence. But humans cared only about one thing, victory. The enemy had never faced such tactics. They were used to foes who fought with predictable strategies, large formations, clear orders, logical defenses. But humans were unpredictable. They fought like they had nothing to lose. And maybe that was true. On Earth, history was filled with wars of survival. Humans had always fought against extinction, disease, famine, natural disasters, even themselves. Their past was a record of endless conflict, and every time, they had found a way to endure. Now, that history shaped them again. Alien generals studied human battles and shook their heads. They fight like madmen, one said. Another whispered, no, they fight like survivors. The difference was important. At the Battle of Cryon Rift, humans showed another trick. They lured the enemy into a narrow passage of space where gravity storms ripped ships apart. No sane commander would fight there. But humans rushed in, weaving between unstable currents, dodging deadly waves of energy. The enemy followed, confused, until the storms themselves tore their ships apart. The galaxy watched in awe. Humans had turned a death trap into a weapon. And yet, for every victory, there was loss. Human fleets never returned whole. Their soldiers often died in numbers that horrified the council. To other races, sacrifice was shameful. To humans, sacrifice was expected. A human commander once said, if one ship must burn so that 10 survive, then let it burn. Those words spread across the stars. To some, they were madness. To others, they were courage. Whispers began to grow. Soldiers of other races, inspired by humans, started fighting differently too. They took risks they would never have taken before. They stood longer, fought harder. The courage of humanity was spreading like fire. But courage had a cost. Earth itself was straining. Factories worked without rest. Colonies sent every resource they could spare. Families wept as their children left for war. Humanity was paying a price few could imagine. And still, they fought. The enemy noticed. Reports showed their commanders focusing more and more on destroying human fleets first. They feared the humans. Not because of their strength, but because of their unpredictability. One alien scholar described it best. Humans are not the strongest. They are not the fastest. They are not the most advanced. But they are the most dangerous, because they refuse to lose. The galaxy began to understand. This was the human way of war. To fight even when outnumbered. To win by cunning, not strength. To sacrifice without hesitation. To make the impossible possible. For the first time in centuries, the enemy slowed. Their advance was no longer unstoppable. Entire systems that would have fallen were now holding. Worlds once abandoned were being reclaimed. Hope was spreading. And yet, a shadow remained. Some leaders whispered in secret. If humans fight like this for others, what will happen if one day they turn against us? Nobody answered. Nobody could. For now, the galaxy had no choice but to rely on them. Because when humans entered the war, something impossible began to happen. The tide was turning. The galaxy had grown used to despair. 4 years, the enemy advanced without pause, taking world after world, destroying fleets, burning civilizations. Every council meeting had ended with more bad news, more maps turning red. But then, the humans came. At first, their victories were small. A single fleet saved here. A single colony defended there. Nothing grand, nothing decisive. But it was different. It was the first time in living memory that the enemy had been slowed. And soon, the difference became impossible to ignore. The Battle of Tyrolese 4 changed everything. It was a world already marked for death. The enemy fleet surrounded it, preparing to burn the surface to ash. The council had declared it lost. Evacuation ships had fled. Not a single alien fleet dared to stay. Only humans came. They arrived in broken ships, patched with scars from other battles. They had no superweapons, no mighty armada. Yet they refused to leave the planet behind. The people of Tyrolese watched from their cities as human ships fell from the sky like sparks in the darkness. At first, it seemed hopeless. The enemy outnumbered them 10-1. But the humans had a plan. Instead of defending the planet directly, they drew the enemy away. They scattered, striking at weak points, luring ships into traps, using the planet's moons for cover. Some ships acted as bait, running with lights blazing, drawing enemy fire until they were destroyed. Others slipped into the shadows, launching ambushes that shattered enemy squadrons. It was chaos. It was madness. And it worked. For 3 days, the battle raged. Human ships burned, one after another, but each death bought time. Each sacrifice saved thousands of civilians below. And when it seemed the enemy would finally overwhelm them, the humans unleashed their final move. They detonated their last ships inside the enemy's formation. Explosions ripped through the void, destroying dozens of enemy craft at once. When the smoke cleared, the impossible had happened. The enemy retreated. The galaxy went silent. A world had been saved. Not by the strongest empire, not by the greatest fleet, but by humans. News spread like wildfire. Refugees wept with joy, praising the mad warriors of Earth. Soldiers whispered the name humanity with awe. The council chambers, once filled with despair, now buzzed with cautious hope. The tide of war was shifting. Human fleets launched more daring missions. They struck behind enemy lines, cutting supply routes. They rescued colonies abandoned by others. They attacked fortresses thought to be untouchable, leaving wreckage in their wake. And everywhere they went, the same stories followed. Humans who fought without fear. Humans who sacrificed without hesitation. Humans who would rather die than surrender. Other species began to change. Inspired by humanity, they fought harder. Fleets that once fled now held their ground. Soldiers who once trembled now stood tall. Hope was contagious. But hope had a cost. Human losses were growing. Entire fleets were gone. Colonies emptied of their young, sending every soldier they could. Factories on Earth worked without rest, building ships as fast as possible, but never fast enough. Still, the humans never slowed. At the Battle of Kalis Reach, an Ocean commander asked a human admiral why they fought with such madness, knowing they could never win every battle. The human only smiled. Because if we fight, there is a chance to win. If we give up, there is none. Those words spread across the stars. Simple. Direct. Unshakable. The galaxy finally began to believe. For the first time, leaders spoke of victory instead of survival. For the first time, soldiers dared to dream of peace. But in the darkness beyond the stars, the enemy was watching. They had never been stopped before, never forced to retreat, never forced to adapt. Until humans. Now, their commanders studied this strange new species. They began shifting tactics, focusing their fury on human fleets. For the first time, they hesitated before attacking. And for the first time, they whispered a name in their own harsh language. Human. The council celebrated, but not all were joyful. Some feared what would come after the war. If humans can do this to the enemy, one leader whispered, what will they do to us one day? Nobody answered. The question hung like a shadow over every victory. For now, the war continued. For now, the galaxy needed them. And so, battle after battle, sacrifice after sacrifice, humanity stood at the front lines. The war was far from over. The enemy was still vast, still powerful. But the galaxy was no longer helpless. Because the humans had shown them something they had forgotten. How to fight. How to hope. How to believe that victory was possible. The tide had begun to turn. And soon, the enemy would learn just how dangerous humanity could be. Victory had a cost. And for humanity, that cost was heavy. The galaxy cheered when the humans saved Tyrolese 4. They celebrated when Kalis Reach was held. They whispered with hope when the enemy began to retreat. To many, humanity had become a legend. But legends bled. Legends burned. Legends died. Behind every victory, there were names that would never be spoken again. Fleets that never returned. Colonies that sent sons and daughters into the stars, and received only silence. On Earth, the truth could not be hidden. Cities overflowed with grief. Families lined the streets, holding pictures of loved ones who would never come home. Factories thundered day and night, their workers exhausted, their skies dark with smoke. Every corner of the planet felt the war pressing down. And yet, still, the humans kept fighting. Why? The council asked the same question. The Ocean High Queen said, they are destroying themselves. The Corran Emperor warned, a species that sacrifices so much will not last. Even allies whispered in fear. How long could humanity endure before it collapsed? But humans knew something the others did not. They had always lived close to extinction. Plagues, disasters, wars among themselves, again and again, their history was survival through pain. Sacrifice was not new. Loss was not new. To be human was to pay the price of survival, no matter how high it was. The enemy learned this too. At the Battle of Irad Belt, the enemy unleashed a massive offensive. Hundreds of ships swarmed the system, determined to crush humanity once and for all. Other species fled, unwilling to face such numbers. But humans stayed. Their fleets fought for every rock, every scrap of space. Outnumbered 5-1, they still launched counterattacks, bleeding the enemy dry. When ships were crippled, humans rammed them into enemy lines. When weapons failed, soldiers detonated reactors with themselves inside. The price was horrifying. Entire squadrons were gone. Thousands of soldiers gave their lives. But when the battle ended, the enemy retreated again. And the legend of humanity grew darker, sharper. The galaxy watched in awe and unease. Soldiers from other races whispered, humans fight like they are already dead. Civilians prayed for human fleets to arrive, knowing salvation came with sacrifice. Leaders, however, grew nervous. What kind of people paid this much and kept standing? Stories began to spread. A single human destroyer holding off an entire squadron until reinforcements arrived. A marine squad detonating themselves to seal a breach, saving a city. A pilot steering a burning ship straight into the enemy's flagship, tearing it apart in fire. The galaxy was inspired. The galaxy was terrified. Because it was becoming clear, humanity's strength was not in ships, or weapons, or numbers. Humanity's strength was in their refusal to stop. They were willing to pay prices no other species could imagine. But Earth was bleeding. Supplies were running thin. Food was rationed. Entire industries turned only to war. Children grew up without parents. Colonies emptied, their young sent to battle. Humanity was burning its future for today's survival. And still, no human complained. When asked why, one soldier gave a simple answer. Because if we do not fight, there will be no future to save. Those words spread across the galaxy, carried by survivors and refugees. To some, it was madness. To others, it was courage beyond understanding. But even as the galaxy praised them, even as victories began to mount, a question lingered in the shadows. How long could humanity last? The Council debated secretly. Some feared humans would collapse, leaving the galaxy hopeless again. Others feared something darker, that humanity would survive, and their willingness to sacrifice would make them unstoppable even after the war. The Trivax counselor said quietly, "The enemy may not be our greatest fear. Humanity may be." No one dared to answer. Meanwhile, the enemy had begun to change. They no longer saw humans as prey. They no longer saw them as weak. Reports whispered that enemy fleets now avoided human patrol zones when possible, choosing to strike elsewhere. It was fear. Fear of humanity. And yet, the enemy adapted. They began hunting humans directly, targeting their colonies, striking at Earth supply lines. If humanity was the heart of resistance, then the enemy wanted to tear that heart out. The galaxy held its breath. Would the humans break? Would the endless sacrifice finally be too much? But humanity did not break. Every loss only sharpened their rage. Every destroyed fleet was replaced, even if it cost everything. Every dead soldier became a reason for the living to fight harder. It was not logic. It was not strategy. It was something else. It was human. And the enemy, for the first time, began to feel something new. Fear. The enemy had never feared before. They had devoured worlds, crushed empires, erased species from existence. To them, war was simple: arrive, destroy, consume. No one had ever slowed them. No one had ever forced them to hesitate. Until the humans. At first, the enemy did not understand. Humans were weak. Their fleets were small, their weapons primitive, their numbers few. Yet again and again, humans stood in their path. Again and again, humans bled them dry. The enemy began to take notice. Scouts reported that human fleets never fought the same way twice. Sometimes they charged with reckless fury, ramming ships until both sides burned. Other times they vanished into the dark, striking from shadows, attacking where the enemy was weakest. There was no pattern. No logic. No rule. Only danger. For the first time, the enemy commanders studied their foe. They watched recordings of human battles, their strange tactics, their brutal sacrifices. They saw ships that fought until they exploded, soldiers who smiled as they walked into death. And the enemy asked themselves a question they had never asked before. What are these creatures? At the Battle of Nerian's Moor, the enemy sent a vast fleet, confident they would finally crush the humans. But when they arrived, the humans did not fight them directly. Instead, they mined the battlefield with explosives hidden in asteroid fields. They lured the enemy into traps, detonating entire moons to destroy them. The losses were staggering. Enemy commanders raged in confusion. No species had ever fought like this. It was chaos. It was madness. And madness was difficult to defeat. Fear spread through the enemy ranks, though they did not speak of it. Their soldiers hesitated when human ships appeared. Their fleet slowed, wary of ambush. Even their mighty war machines began to pull back when humans arrived. For the first time in history, the enemy retreated not from strength, but from terror. One commander of the enemy studied humanity more closely than the rest. He watched every battle, every tactic. He saw the strange truth others missed. Humans were not trying to win every battle. They were trying to make the enemy bleed, no matter the cost. Every human death was a weapon. Every sacrifice was a blade. Every loss carried meaning. The commander whispered in his own harsh tongue. Against these creatures, victory is never true. Because even when they die, they win. That truth spread among the enemy like poison. And soon, whispers reached even their highest command. A new word formed in their language. A word that meant the dangerous ones. It was their name for humanity. The enemy's fear was not only on the battlefield. It was in their strategy. They began avoiding human-controlled systems. They struck at weaker species instead, hoping to starve the humans of allies. But wherever they turned, the humans followed, forcing them to fight. The galaxy noticed. For the first time, the unstoppable swarm, the endless destroyers, were retreating when humans appeared. For the first time, the enemy had found something they could not crush with numbers. Fear. But fear made them desperate. At the siege of Varin's Star, the enemy threw everything they had at one system. Their goal was simple: annihilate humanity in one massive strike. If they could erase the humans, the war would return to its natural course, one of endless conquest. The humans knew this too. They gathered every fleet, every soldier, every weapon they could. It was a battle they should not have survived. And yet, somehow, they did. Ships burned, planets shook, stars themselves trembled. But when the dust cleared, the humans still stood. Blooded, broken, scarred, but alive. The enemy retreated again. And something terrifying became clear. The enemy was no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. In the council chambers, alien leaders watched the reports in silence. The Trivax counselor whispered, "The enemy fears them." The Ocean Queen added, "Perhaps fear is the only weapon they cannot resist." But another voice spoke quietly, a voice that carried unease. "If the enemy fears humanity so much, what happens when the war is over? What happens when we are the enemy?" The question lingered like a shadow. Because the galaxy was beginning to see humanity as something more than an ally. More than a savior. They were beginning to see humanity as something dangerous. And they were right. The humans had not only changed the war. They had changed the enemy itself. For the first time, the unstoppable destroyers of worlds were afraid. And fear was only the beginning.